So for today, we're looking at proportions. So a proportion is an equality of ratios. It basically just means that if you have a ratio or a fraction, that they're equal. So here we have ratios A to B and C to D. We can set up those ratios as fractions, A over B and C over D. And if there is an equal sign in between them, then we can cross multiply. And that's what we're going to be doing a lot of. You see here how they did A times D, and that has to equal B times C. That's what we're going to look at a lot with proportions. If you have two fractions that are equal, you can cross multiply them. Now, sometimes you have two fractions and they're asking if they're equal. Well, you can double check by cross multiplying. Let's look at some examples. It says use cross products to see if each pair of ratios forms a proportion. Replace each box with either equal to or not equal to. Okay, well, for them to be a proportion, when we cross multiply, they have to be equal. So let's look at that. If we cross multiply here, we would do 6 times 10. And that has to equal 5 times 15. So let's calculate each of those and see if they're equal. Most of us know 6 times 10, but it's okay if you want to type in your calculator just to double check. 6 times 10 is 60. Oops, didn't type that in all the way. And then the other one was 5 times 15. So we get 60 and 75. 60 does not equal 75, so these are not a proportion. Let's look at the next one. We're going to go ahead and cross multiply. 3 times 20, and we're seeing if that equals 15 times 4. Now remember, when you multiply, it does not matter what order you write it in. So you could put 3 times 20 or you could put 20 times 3. The order on this side doesn't matter. Just like you could do 4 times 15 or 15 times 4, the order doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and do these in our calculator. Let me clear all this out. We have 3 times 20, which is 60. And then we had 4 times 15, which is also 60. So since 60 equals 60, these are a proportion. So we know there can be an equal sign in the middle there. Excuse me. All right, so we want to solve each problem. So in this case, we are trying to figure out how to solve for x. And since we see two fractions with an equal sign in the middle, that's going to trigger our brains to cross multiply. So we're going to go ahead and do that. On the first side, we will have 2 times x. And remember, I said the order doesn't matter. You could have x times 2 or 2 times x. We usually see it with the number first, so that's how I'm going to write it. And then on the other side, you either have 3 times 1.4 or 1.4 times 3. The order does not matter. I'm going to go ahead and use parentheses to show multiplication. Remember, you can use a dot, or you can just smush them together, or you can use parentheses. So there's lots of different ways to write multiplication. But now we have an equation that we have to solve for x. And remember, our goal is to get x by itself. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this out. 3 times 1.4. Oh, geez, go away. 3 times 1.4 is 4.2. So I get 2x equals 4.2. And then every time we solve an equation, our job is to get x by itself. Right now it's 2 times x, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we're going to use inverse operations to get rid of that. And we'll be left with 1x equals, and then we can go to our calculator and do 4.2 divided by 2, and that equals 2.1. So our x value here is 2.1. Let's check out another one. We're going to start off by cross multiplying, and the reason I know I can cross multiply is because there is an equal sign in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and do 8 times x first. And then I'm going to do 24 times 10. and I have to solve this for x. Well, I'm going to multiply 24 times 10 first. And some of you guys know this. When you multiply by 10, you can just add a 0 onto your original number. If you didn't know that, that's fine. Go to your calculator and type it in. Let me get rid of all these. You could always go to your calculator and type in 24 times 10. All right, and then equals 8 times x. Since we have 8 times x and we want to get x by itself, the opposite of multiplying is dividing, so we would need to divide each side by 8. And then we could go to our calculator, and we could do 240 divided by 8, and that equals 30. So in this case, x has to equal 30. So when you want to do a problem like this, when you want to solve it, you would cross multiply and then divide. Those are the 2 steps. And you can even write those steps up here. Cross multiply. Oops. Then divide. All right, this one says create a proportion and solve. A recipe uses 2 cups of flour to make 48 cookies. How much flour is needed to make 72 cookies? All right, so if we're going to create a proportion, we need to have 2 fractions that are equal to each other. All right, let's go ahead and look at this information right here, and let's make this first sentence into its own fraction. So in my first fraction, it doesn't matter what order you do it. I'm going to do 2 on top and 48 on bottom. Now here's what's important. We need to label what these are. So on the top I have cups of flour, and on the bottom I have number of cookies. So because I set up my first fraction as cups of flour over cookies, I need to make sure when I set up my second fraction, I do cups of flour over cookies. It's really important when you set up your fractions that you set them up the same way. It does not matter how you set up the first fraction. You could have done 48 over 2. It doesn't matter as long as your second fraction matches it, which is why I like to label. So then if we look at the second sentence, it says how much flour is needed to make 72 cookies. So when we put in our 72, it can't go on top because that's flour. It has to go on the bottom where we have cookies. And we don't know how much flour, so we're going to give that an X. Excuse me. So this is how we can set up our proportion. And then to solve it, we're going to cross multiply. Now, I like my x to come first. So, in the last couple of examples, I was cross multiplying these first. But remember, it doesn't matter the order. And I like my x to come first in my equation, so I'm actually going to do 48 times x first. That way I get the x on the left-hand side, which is the way that I usually like to look at it. And then I'm going to do 2 times 72. And now I have this equation to solve. You know what? I don't really like dots for multiplication in this situation because it kind of looks like $2.72. So I'm going to change that to a parentheses. And I'm going to go to my calculator and I am going to multiply 2 times 72. And that's 144. So I get 48x equals 144. So remember, our first step was to multiply, and then our second step is to divide. So we're going to divide each side by 48. Cross multiply, then divide. So 144 divided by 48 equals 3. So in order to make 72 cookies, I would need 3 cups of flour. And if you ever get to an answer like 3 and you're like, wait, I don't even remember what that means, you can look over at how you labeled it. And we labeled that as cups of flour. Are the ratios proportional? Well, the way we check to see if they're proportional is we cross multiply and we see if they are equal. So we're trying to figure out if we can cross multiply here. So let's try it. Let's do 46 times 82. Oops, I just put 8. That's not what I wanted. And let's see if that equals, what do we got here? 48 times 69. So we're testing it. If it's equal, then it is proportional. And if it's not, then it's not. So let's do 48 times, what was that? 82? And I'm just going to hit enter, and then I'm going to type in the next one, which was, oh man, that was 46 times 82. Let me go back and fix that. 46 times 82. Okay, and then the next one was 48 times 69. These two numbers are not equal. 3,772 does not equal 3,312. So these are not proportional. So when you're trying to figure out if it's proportional, you cross multiply and you see if they're equal. If they are equal, it is proportional, and if they're not equal, it is not proportional. And that's it. Good luck on this quick check.